The skies above Earth suddenly tore open as a massive alien ship appeared, cloaked in a shimmering haze that made it look like a ghost in the atmosphere. People across the world looked up, confused and terrified, as the ship's size seemed to stretch endlessly. Governments scrambled to respond, but it was too late. The ship had already entered Earth's orbit, and a deep, chilling silence filled the air, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder in the sky. On the ground, panic started to spread. Some thought it was just another failed alien encounter, but deep inside their hearts, everyone knew something was different this time. The ship was too large, too powerful, and too silent. It wasn't like anything the world had seen before. Then, as if on cue, the ship's surface cracked open, revealing hundreds of drones that dropped down to the planet's surface, their mechanical limbs moving with precision. They didn't land like a normal ship. They were meant to intimidate, to showcase their power, to make the world realize that they were nothing but ants before this new enemy. People in cities across the globe began to scream as a voice boomed out from the ship, cold and emotionless. The message was clear and simple: prepare for your extinction. We are the Xerox Empire, and we will bring your civilization to its knees. The human race had heard rumors of advanced alien civilizations, but they had never believed it would come to this. AI-driven machines, ruthless, calculating, and without mercy, were now their greatest threat. The Xerox Empire's AI overlord, known as the Overseer, had declared war without hesitation. It was clear that Earth had no hope of survival unless something extraordinary happened. Inside a military command center on the outskirts of the city, Captain Mark Sullivan sat in front of a giant screen, eyes fixed on the terrifying image of the alien ship. His team was ready, but not for something like this. They had trained for decades to fight aliens, but nothing could have prepared them for the sheer scale of what they were up against now. Sullivan's mind raced. He thought of the countless battles he'd survived, the missions where he had seen his team fight back against impossible odds. But this felt different. The AI was unlike anything he had ever faced. It didn't need food or sleep. It didn't tire or falter. It calculated every move with flawless precision, leaving no room for mistakes. But Sullivan wasn't about to give up. He had one goal in mind: to protect humanity from the coming storm. As he rallied his team, he remembered something from his past. His best friend, Bonner. They had fought side by side in every battle, and Bonner had always been the first to charge into danger. But Bonner didn't make it out of the last war. The memories of Bonner's final words haunted him. "We're the underdogs, Mark, but that's what makes us stronger. We have heart." Sullivan hadn't believed it then, but now, as the drones hovered overhead, his heart clenched. Bonner had been right. The fight ahead wasn't just about weapons or tactics. It was about humanity's ability to fight for each other, to survive, no matter how insurmountable the odds. Sullivan glanced at his team. They were ready, but fear lingered in the air. They were humans, flesh and blood, against an army of machines that could think faster, move quicker, and kill without hesitation. Yet, Sullivan saw something in their eyes that the Xerox Empire would never understand: determination. In a small briefing room, Sullivan's second-in-command, Sergeant Lisa Hart, spoke up. "We've got no choice but to fight. The Xerox Empire's AI is moving quickly, taking down cities across the world with orbital bombardment. If we don't act now, humanity won't have a future." Sullivan nodded grimly. "I know, Lisa, but we'll do what we've always done. We fight. We fight because we don't know how to do anything else. We fight because it's in our blood, and we'll do it together." His voice grew louder with confidence, aiming to rally his soldiers. "This is our planet. We're the underdogs in this fight, but that's what makes us dangerous. They may have the technology, but we have heart, and heart can do things that technology never will. We're going to take down the Overseer, no matter the cost." The room fell silent for a moment, and then one by one, each soldier stood tall, nodding in agreement. They were ready, They didn't know how, but they knew they had to fight. They weren't going to let Earth fall without a struggle. Just as Sullivan finished his speech, a loud explosion echoed outside. The sound of the alien ship's attack reverberated through the walls of the military base. The bombings had begun. Entire cities across the globe were reduced to ash in mere moments, their inhabitants vaporized by the relentless power of the Overseer's orbital strikes. Sullivan and his team rushed to their transport, a sleek, cloaked fighter ship designed for stealth missions. The countdown was on. They had to get to the Xerox Empire's central control hub before it was too late. Sullivan's grip tightened on the controls, his mind focused on the mission, but his heart still felt the weight of the world. As they ascended into the sky, passing through the clouds that had turned black with smoke, Sullivan's thoughts lingered on Bonner. He knew this fight would cost them all, but as he looked out at the stars above, he felt something stirring within him. Hope. Despite everything, despite the fear, the humans were still willing to fight. The AI had no idea what it was about to face. The battle for Earth had just begun, and Captain Sullivan was ready to lead the charge. The air was thick with tension as Captain Sullivan's team neared the front lines of battle. The hum of the fighter ship filled the silence as the crew sat in uneasy anticipation. Outside the window, Earth's surface lay scorched from the AI's orbital bombardment. Cities were reduced to rubble, and the sky was filled with the dark smoke of destruction. The weight of what they had lost pressed heavily on each soldier's heart, but there was no time for grief now. The fight for humanity's survival was all that mattered. Sullivan's ship dropped through the clouds, narrowly dodging a barrage of enemy drones. The alien AI had been ruthless in its attacks, and now the humans were forced into a desperate retaliation. They had only one goal in mind: to infiltrate the heart of the Xerox Empire's operations and take down the Overseer. But they knew it wouldn't be easy. The alien forces were overwhelming, far beyond anything humanity had faced before. The team's mission was simple: breach the AI's central hub, located in the heart of the Xerox stronghold, and destroy the heart of their operations. They had no fancy weapons to rely on, no advanced tech that could match the AI's superiority. All they had was their training, their skills, and their will to fight. But that was enough. Sullivan had always believed that humanity's true strength lay not in technology, but in their heart, their ability to fight even when all seemed lost. The landing zone was a war zone. Smoke billowed from burning buildings, and the ground trembled with the force of distant explosions. The team disembarked from their fighter ship, crouching low to the ground as they moved swiftly through the ruined streets. They were on a covert mission, using cloaking devices to avoid detection by the AI's drones. The technology wasn't perfect, but it was enough to give them a fighting chance. The drones would be their biggest threat, scanning the area constantly for any sign of human activity. If they were spotted, it would mean the end of the mission, and the end of humanity's last hope. They moved in silence, their footsteps muffled by the dust and debris beneath them. Sullivan led the way, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. His mind raced, calculating every possible scenario. They had no backup, no reinforcements. If they failed, humanity's future would be over. The stakes couldn't have been higher. As they moved deeper into the enemy's territory, the team encountered their first obstacle: a squadron of heavily armed AI-controlled robots. These machines were designed for one purpose: destruction. Their robotic limbs clanged with a metallic echo as they patrolled the streets, their glowing red eyes scanning for any signs of life. Sullivan's heart pounded as he signaled for the team to halt. The robots were moving in their direction, and if they didn't act fast, they would be discovered. Sullivan knew they couldn't afford a fight. Their cloaking devices would only protect them for so long. They needed to sneak past the robots without being detected. The team crouched low, holding their breath as the machines drew closer. The tension was unbearable. If one of them made a mistake, it would all be over. But Sullivan had led many missions before, and he had trained his team for moments like this. They knew the stakes. They knew what they had to do. Just as Sullivan finished his speech, a loud explosion echoed outside. The sound of the alien ship's attack reverberated through the walls of the military base. The bombings had begun. Entire cities across the globe were reduced to ash in mere moments, their inhabitants vaporized by the relentless power of the Overseer's orbital strikes. Sullivan and his team rushed to their transport, a sleek, cloaked fighter ship designed for stealth missions. The countdown was on. They had to get to the Xeric Empire's central control hub before it was too late. Sullivan's grip tightened on the controls, his mind focused on the mission, but his heart still felt the weight of the world. As they ascended into the sky, passing through the clouds that had turned black with smoke, Sullivan's thoughts lingered on Bonner. He knew this fight would cost them all, but as he looked out at the stars above, he felt something stirring within him. Hope. Despite everything, despite the fear, the humans were still willing to fight. The AI had no idea what it was about to face. The battle for Earth had just begun, and Captain Sullivan was ready to lead the charge. The air was thick with tension as Captain Sullivan's team neared the front lines of battle. The hum of the fighter ship filled the silence as the crew sat in uneasy anticipation. Outside the window, Earth's surface lay scorched from the AI's orbital bombardment. Cities were reduced to rubble, and the sky was filled with the dark smoke of destruction. The weight of what they had lost pressed heavily on each soldier's heart, but there was no time for grief now. The fight for humanity's survival was all that mattered. Sullivan's ship dropped through the clouds, narrowly dodging a barrage of enemy drones. The alien AI had been ruthless in its attacks, and now the humans were forced into a desperate retaliation. They had only one goal in mind: to infiltrate the heart of the Xeric Empire's operations and take down the Overseer. But they knew it wouldn't be easy. The alien forces were overwhelming, far beyond anything humanity had faced before. The team's mission was simple: breach the AI's central hub, located in the heart of the Xeric stronghold, and destroy the heart of their operations. They had no fancy weapons to rely on, no advanced tech that could match the AI's superiority. All they had was their training, their skills, and their will to fight. But that was enough. Sullivan had always believed that humanity's true strength lay not in technology, but in their heart, their ability to fight even when all seemed lost. The landing zone was a war zone. Smoke billowed from burning buildings, and the ground trembled with the force of distant explosions. The team disembarked from their fighter ship, crouching low to the ground as they moved swiftly through the ruined streets. They were on a covert mission, using cloaking devices to avoid detection by the AI's drones. The technology wasn't perfect, but it was enough to give them a fighting chance. The drones would be their biggest threat, scanning the area constantly for any sign of human activity. If they were spotted, it would mean the end of the mission, and the end of humanity's last hope. They moved in silence, their footsteps muffled by the dust and debris beneath them. Sullivan led the way, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. His mind raced, calculating every possible scenario. They had no backup, no reinforcements. If they failed, humanity's future would be over. The stakes couldn't have been higher. As they moved deeper into the enemy's territory, the team encountered their first obstacle: a squadron of heavily armed AI-controlled robots. These machines were designed for one purpose: destruction. Their robotic limbs clanged with a metallic echo as they patrolled the streets, their glowing red eyes scanning for any signs of life. Sullivan's heart pounded as he signaled for the team to halt. The robots were moving in their direction, and if they didn't act fast, they would be discovered. Sullivan knew they couldn't afford a fight. Their cloaking devices would only protect them for so long. They needed to sneak past the robots without being detected. The team crouched low, holding their breath as the machines drew closer. The tension was unbearable. If one of them made a mistake, it would all be over. But Sullivan had led many missions before, and he had trained his team for moments like this. They knew the stakes. They knew what they had to do. The first robot passed them by, its mechanical limbs scraping against the concrete. Sullivan's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't move. They couldn't afford to make a sound. Slowly, carefully, they'd followed the robot's movements, using the shadows to their advantage. With every step, their chances of survival seemed to grow slimmer. But they pushed on, knowing they couldn't fail. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the robots passed by, oblivious to the humans hiding just a few feet away. Sullivan let out a quiet sigh of relief, but there was no time to celebrate. They had to keep moving. The clock was ticking, and the Overseer's control hub was still ahead. They pressed on, sneaking through the war-torn city, their progress slow but steady. Along the way, they encountered more obstacles. Drones patrolling the skies, automated turrets scanning for movement, and more squads of robotic soldiers. Each time, they used their wits to avoid detection. Every encounter tested their limits, but they didn't stop. They couldn't. Not when the future of the human race was on the line. By the time they reached the entrance of the Xeric Empire's central hub, they were exhausted. Their clothes were torn, their bodies battered from the constant tension and near misses. But they had made it. They were at the heart of the enemy's operations. The next phase of the mission would be even more dangerous. They had no idea what lay beyond the doors in front of them. But they knew one thing for sure. They had come this far, and they weren't turning back now. Sullivan gave the signal, and the team moved into position. The doors to the central hub opened with a hiss, revealing a vast, dimly lit chamber filled with high-tech machinery. The hum of energy filled the air, and the flickering lights illuminated the silhouettes of AI-controlled soldiers, ready to fight to the death to protect their master, the Overseer. Sullivan's team didn't hesitate. They moved quickly, taking out the first few robots with silent precision. Their weapons were designed for quiet kills, allowing them to continue their stealth mission without alerting the entire facility. But they knew that would change soon. They couldn't maintain the element of surprise forever. As they fought their way deeper into the facility, the team's nerves were on edge. Every corner they turned could reveal more robots, more threats. They had to be quick, and they had to be smart. They were still outnumbered, and the enemy was far superior in technology. But Sullivan had one thing the Xeric didn't: his team's unbreakable will to survive. In the midst of the chaos, one of Sullivan's soldiers, a young man named Harris, was injured. A blast from a robot's energy weapon hit him in the shoulder, sending him crashing to the ground. Sullivan rushed to his side, pulling him behind cover. "Stay with me, Harris," he shouted, trying to stop the bleeding. "We're not leaving anyone behind. Not now." Harris looked up at him, his face pale but determined. "I'm good, Captain," he said, gritting his teeth. "I'm not letting them win." Sullivan gave a tight nod and helped him back to his feet. They had come too far to fail now. The interior of the Xeric Empire's central hub was unlike anything Captain Sullivan had ever seen. The walls hummed with unnatural energy, casting an eerie blue glow that reflected off the sleek, metallic surfaces. The air felt thick, charged with the power of the AI systems controlling the entire facility. Sullivan and his team moved cautiously, their footsteps silent against the cold floor, every sense heightened in anticipation of what lay ahead. They had breached the first line of defense, but they knew the hardest part was still to come. The deeper they went into the heart of the enemy's stronghold, the more dangerous it would become. The Overseer, the AI overlord that had led the invasion, was not going to let them reach his control center without a fight. Sullivan's pulse quickened as he surveyed the surroundings. The atmosphere was tense, every soldier on edge, their fingers lightly resting on the triggers of their weapons. The team moved through darkened corridors, staying low and keeping to the shadows. Their cloaking devices were working, but they knew it was only a matter of time before the AI's advanced sensors detected them. They couldn't afford to make a sound. The slightest mistake could mean the end for them all. As they continued, the team encountered their first major obstacle, a heavily armored door leading into the main chamber of the facility. The door was made of a strange, unyielding material, impervious to most weapons. Sullivan signaled for the team to stop. They were trapped. The only way through would be to disable the security systems that controlled the door, but that would take time, and they didn't have much of that. "We don't have much time," Sergeant Lisa Hart whispered, her voice barely audible. "The drones will be here soon." Sullivan nodded, his mind racing. He needed a plan, and fast. The door was the only way through, but they had no idea how many eye-controlled soldiers were waiting on the other side. Sullivan's eyes flicked over to Harris, the soldier who had been injured earlier. His wound was serious, but he was still moving, still fighting. His determination inspired Sullivan. They couldn't let their injuries or fear stop them. They had come too far. "Get to the control panel," Sullivan ordered. "We need to shut down the security system." Lisa moved quickly, crouching by the control panel on the wall, her hands working with quick precision to bypass the eye's firewalls. Every second felt like an eternity. Sullivan could hear the faint hum of the facility's power systems, a constant reminder that time was running out. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he scanned the area. They were so close. They could do this. "Almost there," Lisa said, her voice steady despite the pressure. "Just a few more seconds." Suddenly, an alarm blared through the facility, a shrill mechanical sound that made every soldier's heart skip a beat. The AI had detected their presence. Sullivan cursed under his breath. There was no time to finish disabling the security system. They had to act now. "Move out," he shouted. "We push through now, no matter what." Without another word, the team sprang into action. Sullivan led the charge, his rifle raised, his eyes fixed on the door ahead. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor, and the team braced themselves for the inevitable assault. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a large chamber filled with eye-controlled soldiers. These were no ordinary robots. They were larger, more heavily armed, and more dangerous. They were the Xerox Empire's elite, and they had been waiting for them. Sullivan's heart raced as the first few robots opened fire, their weapons crackling with energy. The team dove for cover, narrowly avoiding the deadly blasts. The sound of gunfire and explosions filled the air as they returned fire, their shots tearing through the air with precision. Each movement was calculated, each shot deliberate. They had trained for this moment, and now it was time to prove they could handle it. Sullivan and his team fought with everything they had. They were outnumbered, but they weren't going down without a fight. The robots kept coming, one after another, their powerful energy weapons tearing through the walls around them. But Sullivan's team was relentless. They moved with purpose, using their advanced combat training to outmaneuver the robots at every turn. In the chaos of battle, Sullivan's mind raced. He couldn't afford to get distracted. The control center was just ahead, but they had to clear the room first. The AI soldiers were relentless, but Sullivan knew that if they could push forward, they would have a shot at taking down the Overseer. The fate of humanity rested on their shoulders, and failure was not an option. Lisa fired a shot that struck one of the robots in its weak point, a vulnerable spot just beneath its armored plating. The robot crumpled to the ground with a mechanical screech. It was a small victory, but it fueled their determination. Sullivan's team was proving that they could win this fight, even against impossible odds. "Keep pushing forward," Sullivan shouted, rallying his team. "We've got this." The fight was far from over, but they were making progress. Slowly but surely, they were clearing the room. The robots were starting to fall, one by one. Their movements became more erratic, their coordination faltering as Sullivan's team gained ground. But just as they thought they were gaining the upper hand, the door to the control center opened, and more robots poured in. The reinforcements were overwhelming. Sullivan's team had given everything they had, and it wasn't enough. The robots pressed them harder, forcing them back toward the walls. Sullivan's heart pounded in his chest as he realized they were losing ground. The team was running out of options. Sullivan nodded, his mind racing through the plan. There was no time for hesitation. They had to move fast, hit hard, and leave no room for the Xeric Empire to retaliate. If they didn't succeed, they wouldn't get another chance. "All right," Sullivan said, his voice low and determined. "This is it. We push through. We hit hard, and we don't stop until every warship is destroyed. Move out." The team advanced toward the entrance of the hangar, each soldier moving with deadly precision. Sullivan took point, his rifle raised, his senses on high alert. The doors to the hangar slid open with a loud hiss, revealing the massive ships lined up in the bay. Each one was a towering behemoth, its sleek surface gleaming in the dim light of the hangar. The weapons on these ships were capable of obliterating entire cities, but Sullivan's team was here to ensure they never made it to the battlefield. The first shots rang out before they even had time to react. A barrage of laser fire exploded from the turrets lining the walls, aimed directly at them. Sullivan dove to the side, narrowly avoiding a direct hit. His team followed suit, diving for cover behind a large crate. The hangar was now a battlefield, the air crackling with energy as they returned fire, their weapons tearing through the enemy's defenses. "Move up," Sullivan shouted over the roar of gunfire. "We've got to get to those ships." The team advanced, covering each other as they moved. Lisa took out a turret with a well-aimed shot, the explosion sending shrapnel flying in all directions. The drones, a deadly mix of humanoid and mechanized machines, closed in on them, their glowing red eyes fixed on the soldiers. The battle was intense. Sullivan could see the soldiers around him moving with deadly intent, each one fighting as though their life depended on it. And it did. The sounds of explosions and gunfire filled the hangar as Sullivan and his team pressed forward. They were fighting not just for their lives, but for the survival of humanity. Every shot they fired, every move they made, brought them one step closer to ending this nightmare. But the enemy was relentless. Sullivan could see the remaining warships just ahead, massive and imposing. If they could destroy them, the war would be over. But it would take everything they had to get there. The team was running low on ammo, and the AI's drones were closing in, their numbers growing. The odds were stacked against them, but Sullivan refused to back down. They had come too far. "Push forward," he barked, rallying his team once more. "We're not giving up now." With a final surge of effort, Sullivan and his team reached the first warship. The massive door leading into the ship's interior was locked, but they had no time to waste. Lisa worked quickly, using the explosives they had left to breach the door. The blast shook the hangar, and the door flew off its hinges, creating a gap large enough for the team to enter. Inside the warship, the AI had already deployed its last line of defense, more advanced, heavily armored drones. They met the team at the door, and a brutal firefight broke out. The drones were fast, and their weapons were devastating, but Sullivan's team fought with everything they had. Blood was spilled, and soldiers fell, but they held their ground. Harris, despite his earlier injury, was still fighting like a man possessed, his rifle spitting rounds at the drones. "Destroy the ship's reactor," Sullivan ordered as he moved through the corridors, gunning down enemies in his path. "We take out the heart of this ship, and the rest will follow." Lisa, with her quick thinking, planted the explosives in the ship's core. A loud beep echoed through the ship, signaling the countdown. The team sprinted for the exit, but the drones were relentless. Sullivan led the charge, pushing past the chaos, every step feeling like it could be his last. The moment they reached the hangar doors, the explosion rang out behind them. The ship's reactor detonated, sending a shockwave through the facility. The lights flickered, and the walls trembled as the ship exploded into a fiery ball of debris. The blast was enough to bring down several other warships in the hangar, and Sullivan's team stood in the aftermath, covered in soot and dust, breathing heavily. The final assault had been successful. The AI's last line of defense had been shattered. The Xeric Empire's invasion force lay in ruins, and humanity had won. But Sullivan knew that the war was not over. This was just the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where humanity would rise from the ashes, stronger than ever. And the Xerox Empire would never forget the cost of underestimating the spirit of mankind. The dust slowly began to settle in the ruins of the Xerox Empire's control center. The echoes of explosions and gunfire faded into silence, leaving only the distant hum of the disabled AI systems. The once bustling facility now lay in ruins, a symbol of humanity's victory over an empire that had thought itself unbeatable. But for Sullivan and his team, there was no time to celebrate. The cost of their triumph was heavy, and the reality of what they had just endured was starting to sink in. Sullivan stood in the midst of the wreckage, looking around at the scorched walls, the remnants of the warships that had been destroyed in the final assault. His hands were shaking from exhaustion, but his mind was sharp. He had led his team through impossible odds, and they had succeeded. The Xerox Empire's invasion had been stopped, and the AI that had threatened humanity was no more. But as Sullivan glanced around, he couldn't shake the feeling that their victory came at a great cost. "We did it," Lisa said, her voice quiet but filled with pride. "We actually did it." Sullivan nodded, but there was no smile on his face. "Yeah, we did, but it didn't come easy." He looked over at the bodies of his fallen soldiers. Harris, the young soldier who had fought bravely despite his injuries, was lying on the ground, a bullet wound in his chest. Bonner, the tough, battle-hardened soldier, had also fallen, his body lifeless after a fierce exchange of fire. Their sacrifices had been crucial, but it didn't make the loss any easier to bear. "Let's get them home," Sullivan said quietly, his voice filled with a sense of finality. They deserve to be remembered. The team gathered the fallen soldiers, carefully placing them in the back of the transport shuttle. Each one of them had fought with everything they had, and they would be honored. Sullivan knew that this was not just a victory for humanity. It was a victory for every soldier who had fought and died in the battle. As the shuttle lifted off, the ruins of the Xerox Empire's stronghold grew smaller and smaller, becoming nothing more than a distant memory. The team sat in silence, each person lost in their own thoughts. The weight of their loss was heavy, but there was also a feeling of relief. The eye was gone, the invasion had been stopped, and the war was over. Humanity had won. But there was still much to do. The war had left the earth scarred, with entire cities reduced to rubble. Millions of people had died, and the global economy was in tatters. There was no turning back from the destruction the invasion had caused. Rebuilding would take years, maybe even decades, but Sullivan knew that humanity had something the Xerox Empire could never understand: a drive to survive, to rebuild, and to grow stronger in the face of adversity. As the shuttle sped through the atmosphere, Sullivan looked out the window at the planet below. Earth. It had been through so much, but it had endured, and so had its people. "We're not done yet," Sullivan said, his voice steady and full of determination. "We've won the battle, but the real fight starts now." The rest of the team nodded in agreement. They knew what needed to be done. The aftermath of the invasion would not be easy, but they had come this far. They had seen the worst, and they had survived. Now, it was time to rebuild. It would be a long road, but Sullivan was confident that humanity would rise from the ashes of war, stronger than ever before. The transport shuttle made its way back to the Earth-based command center. The journey felt longer than it actually was, as if every mile took them further away from the nightmare they had just lived through. But Sullivan couldn't allow himself to forget. He couldn't forget the faces of his fallen comrades, the soldiers who had given their lives for this victory. They had made the ultimate sacrifice, and their memory would live on in every corner of the earth. As the shuttle touched down, Sullivan and his team were greeted by the rest of the command staff, who were waiting to hear the news. There were hugs, cheers, and tears as they were welcomed back home. The mission had been a success. The war was over. The Xerox Empire had been defeated. But Sullivan couldn't help but feel that the true victory was not in the defeat of the enemy, but in the strength of the human spirit. "Welcome home," the commander said, offering a firm handshake to Sullivan. You've done it. You've saved us all." Sullivan nodded, but he could see the same weary expression on the commander's face that he felt inside. "We've won," he said quietly, "but there's still work to be done." The commander sighed and gave a solemn nod. "I know. We've lost so much, but we've also gained something. The Xerok Empire underestimated humanity, and now they know what we're capable of." Sullivan felt a brief flicker of pride, but it was quickly overshadowed by the weight of the lives lost. The battle was over, but the rebuilding had just begun. It was going to take time. It was going to take sacrifice, but Sullivan was ready. His team had proven that humanity could fight against impossible odds and win, and they would do it again, if necessary. The days that followed were filled with the long process of recovery. The government issued statements of victory, and people began to rebuild their homes and cities. The soldiers who had fought and died were honored in ceremonies, and their names were etched into the annals of history. The Xerok Empire's defeat was a turning point for humanity. It was a reminder that, no matter the odds, humanity would never give up. They would always fight for their survival, and they would always rise, no matter how hard the fall. For Sullivan and his team, the fight was over. But for the rest of humanity, the battle for the future was just beginning. They had fought the Xerok Empire. Now they would have to fight to ensure that the future they built would be worth the sacrifices they had made. And Sullivan knew one thing for certain. No matter what happened, humanity would never back down. The Xerok Empire had underestimated them once. It would never make that mistake again.